I wanted to call this meeting to order. The first order of business is to seek a motion for amendment to remove the old business under subject A off the agenda until our chair returns. That's Town of Christiansburg fee for service.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Call the roll, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Gabriel?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Perkins?
Aye.
Mr. Creed?
Aye.
Mr. Brown?
Aye.
6 ayes.
Yeah. Into closed meeting, be it resolved, the Board of Supervisors hereby enters into closed, no, I need a motion to go, right? In the closed meeting?
Yes, sir.
Motion
So
to go?
moved. Second. Fourth.
Okay. Call the roll.
Mr. Creed?
Aye.
Ms. Perkins?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Gabriel?
Aye.
For the purpose of discussion or consideration of the acquisition of real property for public purpose, or for the disposition of publicly held real property, or a discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body. And one under that is Old Blacksburg Middle School property. Discussion, consideration, or interviews of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, discipline, or resignation of specific officers, appointees, or employees of any body, the Community Services Board, the Economic Development Authority, and the Planning Commission. We are in closed meeting. Need a motion to go out of closed session.
So moved. Second.
Please call the roll.
Ms. Perkins?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Gabriel?
Aye.
Mr. Creed?
Aye.
Mr. Brown?
Aye.
6 ayes.
Certification of the closed meeting. Whereas the Board of Supervisors of Montgomery County has convened a closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. And whereas Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by the board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Supervisors of Montgomery County, Virginia, hereby certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge, one, on a public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting, in which the certification resolution applies, and two, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion conveying the closed meeting was heard, discussed, or considered by the board. Need a motion for certification?
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Gabriel?
Aye.
Mr. Creed?
Aye.
Ms. Perkins?
Aye.
Mr. Brown?
Aye.
6 ayes.
Next time for invocation, and we always observe a, first let me say this, our chair, Mr. Politis, is away on a family medical emergency. Just to let you know that he's not with us tonight. Next, our invocation is observed by a moment of silence. You can reflect in any manner that you see fit. And after a moment of silence, we will be led by the Pledge of Allegiance by Mr. Meadows.
Let us pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much.
The next order of business would be a delegation from the Virginia Department of Transportation. Mr. David Clark from the Department of Virginia Department of Transportation will provide us an update on road issues in Montgomery County.
Good evening. As last time, there's not a lot of recent activity to report other than still cleaning up from the very damaging storms we had in January and February, the flooding. Really took out a lot of gravel roads, a lot of pipe, just soft gravel roads that hit a really bad time because when they get so soft you really can't even get equipment in there. It hit residency-wide, or my area-wide, Giles and Pulaski, it almost as hard as Montgomery. Except for, you may not know, Montgomery has quite a bit more mileage of gravel roads than Giles or Pulaski. Not as much as Floyd, but that area, the southern part of Montgomery County, Floyd County, have just a lot of unpaved roads. So they were hit very hard by the flooding and before that, the snow that just took down a lot of trees. So you'll see a lot of limbs still around. We haven't been able to get to basically cutting roads out and then getting gravel roads repaired. We'll come back once the gravel roads and pipe are all in and try to get some of that up. At the same time, doing a lot of patching. This spring pothole season is here. I'll provide you a list next month or the month after of the roads that will get resurfaced. There's not as much this year as last, because last year we did close to 60 miles in the county. So they're moving the money around, and Montgomery won't even have as much on the secondary system this year. One thing coming up next month is the 6-year plan public hearing for secondary road construction. The annual public hearing, we'll hold that at your April 11th meeting. We'll place ads in the paper and post the notice. And, we'll have that next month. A couple other larger projects on the horizon. As spring gets here, we'll be working on about 621 Craigs Creek Road to finish the surface treatment of that we started last fall. It's finishing up a revenue sharing project, a 6-year plan project. Hope to advertise for bids in the next couple months. Yellow Sulphur Road. I think it's about 3/4 of a mile, half a mile to 3/4 of a mile, beginning on the Christiansburg side of the unpaved portion of Yellow Sulphur Road. And a little smaller, but still a significant project. There's a failed pipe on Wake Forest Road that we are planning on jacking a new pipe through there rather than try to. It's very deep, so it'd be there's no detour on Wake Forest Road if you're not familiar with it. To set up something around the pipe would be tough, so we're going to have to jack the pipe through there, but that'll replace a pipe that's failed. And we're lucky really that it's lasted through these last big rains, but we'll get that through, and we'll do it under traffic pretty easily.
That's going to be something to see. I mean, that when you're on the road and you look down, and there's a creek that runs through up and under the road, and I don't know how deep the soil is over top of it.
Deep, yeah.
And but I'm surprised that it lasts that long. Even when I was like 12 or 13, riding the school bus across it, it was in there then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I guess eventually it just rust out and come down. But it's going to be something to see.
A new pipe on a much bigger pipe, so that's
Yeah, you can.
a good project.
You probably can sell tickets to that project. Just getting equipment down in the holler is going to be,
Yeah.
I guess you have to have a helicopter or something to get it down in there.
Yeah, and we require quite a bit of environmental coordination because we're going to be basically down there sort of in the creek at the same time, jacking a pipe through there. So yeah. Again, that's all the updates I have. We got to take any questions. Requests from the board?
I have just a question about the poly pavement. How's it going?
It's still holding up pretty well. And this has been a tough winter. Of course, spring is another tough season on unpaved roads, so it would be interesting to see here. I think every season's tough in a different way for unpaved roads. It has its own special consideration. So if we have a wet spring and thawing out, that's going to be something to test it against. And then this summer when it gets dry and supposedly dusty, we'll see how it handles that. But so far, so good.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Creed?
Okay, and I just really don't have a question. I want to thank you for how quickly you did get it done. I mean, there was lots of roads down my way that needed lots of attention, and the bigger part of them by far has been done and look pretty doggone good at this point.
We're getting ready to move into Fisher's U and do some work on there. We had to get environmental clearance for that, but that's come through, so we'll be working on Fisher's U here pretty soon.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Clark, for the update.
Thank you.
Next order of business is our public address session. This is a period when any resident can speak to the board about board business. I think we have a couple names signed up, but please come to the speaker's podium, clearly state your name and address, using the mic, and speakers will have a total of 5 minutes. All comments should be directed to the board. Mr. Jack Seklovich? Oh, no, Sharon Brockman is first. It was typed in there, so I'm good.
My name is Sharon Brockman. I live at 710 West Main Street, Christiansburg, and I'm here to talk about the proposed increase in the tax rates. I think it takes quite a bit of hubris on your part to be proposing another tax rate after last year. Not all households cannot count on getting a raise every year. I don't think that the governments ought to count on that either. Additionally, the breathtaking tax increase of last year has resulted in $2 million of revenue to the county that you weren't expecting, if I understand correctly. And I think that $2 million would go a long ways towards funding any additional expenses or projects that the county has. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Jack?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jack Selkowitz. I live at High Rock Hill Road down in Pilot. Sorry about Jim's wife. I hope everything will be fine. According to your FY 2013 budget, revenues are expected, and we're still in that year, are expected to increase $2 million. In the proposed 2014 budget, which we'll be discussing tonight, another $2.6 million is anticipated. Where do you think that money comes from? The taxpayers gave $2 million of their own dollars to the county government. Certainly, our collective salaries did not increase that much. We had to stop spending as much money as we did in prior years. I listened to the budget presentation last week and heard our budget manager, Mark Magruder, report receipts of personal property taxes were less than expected. He referenced the fact that people were keeping their older vehicles instead of purchasing new ones. This should come as no surprise to anyone who knows basic math. We had to stop buying new cars. We had to eat out less, donate less to our favorite charities, and buy less goods from local merchants. Every time you take $1 from a taxpayer, you take a piece of their freedom away. That dollar is now in the hands of the government to spend as you folks deem appropriate. You get to decide which charities and organizations are important. The taxpayer has lost $1, which he or she would have the freedom to donate to their favorite charity, give to their church of choice, or spend on their family or food or for clothing. $1 that could buy a newspaper that employs the very reporters in our room tonight. You took away their freedom to see a movie of their choice, presents for a child's birthday, or put it towards purchasing a new lawnmower or a new car? How many farmers put off purchasing a new tractor or other pieces of farm equipment this past year? $2 million in the hands of taxpayers could have bought quite a few new cars. How many car sales did Sheeler and Duncan lose this year because of your onerous 12 cents tax increase? How many car salesmen or tractor salesmen did not get commissions because sales dropped? How much sales tax revenue was lost? Behold the law of unintended consequences. You set aside $1 million last year towards funding a new animal shelter, a worthy cause. Before you consider raising taxes again, can someone on this panel please explain what steps were taken with that $1 million to begin to replace the existing shelter? Did we break ground? Did we move the county garage to begin the process? Did we do anything with the $1 million? Please account for the funds you already took from the taxpayers before you ask for 1 penny more. Is that too much to ask? The citizens of this county are taxed enough already. Why raise taxes when the government hasn't even spent the money taken from us this fiscal year? The taxpayers need a respite from new tax increases for a year or two. With new commerce moving into our county, supplementing the existing tax base, there should be adequate revenues to maintain our capital reserve funds and expenditures for the upcoming year. We urge the members of this Board of Supervisors to carefully go over the figures presented to you by the staff before you decide to set a tax rate for our citizens. We expect you to be our fiscal stewards. You work for the citizens of this county. Please show us you care. Thank you.
Irma Cox.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Irma Cox. I live at 5861 Piney Woods Road. I come to you from a private business, small dairy farm. I want to talk to you about what it's like at the ground level and to remind you that we get hurt seriously by a penny or two. We are a private business. Nobody subsidizes us. My husband and his brother work together. They have to produce crops. The dairy business is one that has to pay all its operating costs going to and from the business. If you build furniture and you want to sell it, then you can take orders from people that can help pay the cost of transportation. It doesn't work that way with a perishable product like milk. We don't have any way to negotiate new price. It's set for us on a national basis. We have no control on it. Any benefits that our family has have to be provided by ourselves. If we have them, for instance, health insurance, we had to take a $6,000 deductible policy just to have some kind of coverage. In government, it's different. It's one of the reasons people like to work for a government. Those kind of things are at least partially provided for them. We're not the only private business that exists. I've been hearing from a lot of people that work at other businesses in the area that if they have as much, the ones that have as many as 50 employees are now seeing their hours cut because if they work 30 hours or more, then the employer is going to have to provide health insurance, which they can't afford, so they're cutting back on people's hours. That's going to mean that those people either have to pick up some other kind of part-time job or their buying power is seriously reduced. I'm sure that we're going to hear from people who are affluent. When you have 6 figures to work with, a couple of pennies on as a rate is not such a big deal. But for those of us that can't enjoy that thing, it's a whole different thing. And I submit to you that other blue collar workers are going to be feeling the pain just as much as we do. We're about to have another state tax increase and other fees on all kinds of services around. And I just don't see how that we can continue to, or that how you can continue to expect people to just cut back and cut back and cut back and not expect that from our government here in the county as well. So I would ask you to either reduce or at least maintain status quo. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other citizens out there who would
Good evening. I'm Roger Aglehart. I live on Whipple Drive in Blacksburg. First of all, I'll just come up front and tell you I am against any increase in taxes. I think this country's at a great threshold right now. We've got tax increases from Congress. We've got health care that's coming on that no one knows what it's going to cost all of us. We just saw the greatest or the largest tax increase in the state of Virginia. When you go to the grocery store, anything you buy today, it's getting more and more expensive. I'm a resident, have property in the town of Blacksburg. My mother, who's 89 years old, has property and has lived there since 1950, before it was incorporated in the town. Her taxes probably will be $2,500 or more a year, both town and county. I don't think anyone, just as the other people have just spoken about, we don't think about the individuals that are on fixed incomes. We let tech be the driving force in this area. People with big six-figure incomes, a couple pennies or 10 cents a year or whatever, might not be a big burden on them. But there are a lot of people in this county and in both towns which unfortunately have to pay two taxes. I think it's just absurd to expect more and more from people. Basically, the only thing the county does for me is serve as the sheriff's office. I can't think of anything else that I get from my tax dollar from the county. I don't. Schools, is an isolated thing, and I think we keep pumping more and more money into the school systems. Which the other thing I wanted to talk about, and I noticed on your closed, the old Blacksburg Middle School property, which is still sitting there. And I'll say once again, I have said before this board before, we tore down a perfectly good building. We allowed it to go to waste because we let a school board spend money on things that they weren't supposed to be spending on, and they weren't looking at a piece of property that they should have been looking at. The property is sitting there without anything on it now, has been sitting there for years. Prices Fork Elementary School sitting there unoccupied. The old Blacksburg High School, I get so confused. We've had so many Blacksburg High Schools, but the one on Patrick Henry now that it's been sitting, for I think 2 or 3 years. Is Shawsville. There's several other properties in this county. What are we doing with these properties? These properties are owned by we, the people. They're sitting there. They're not paying taxes. No one's paying taxes on them. There's no income being generated from them. Have any of you all ever thought of that? It's just like an albatross that's sitting there, doing no one any good. But yet we come and we have this discussion about keep raising taxes. Where's it going to end? And what are we going to do with the property that we have on hands right now? Does anyone have an answer? Does anyone on this board care? And then the burden keeps being placed on the people. Well, there's a large amount of people maybe in this county that can afford the Charles Steegers who can afford to send a letter and maybe tell us that we need a new high school. Those people can afford to have a couple pennies or 10 cents or 20 or 50 or 100 cents, whatever. It doesn't affect them very much. But the average person, and a lot of people on fixed incomes, it does affect. Once again, I'll just say that I am against any tax increase. I think there's got to be things that can be cut. I have seen too much waste when I worked at Tech. I see waste in the state of Virginia, and I see abundance of waste in the federal government. And I think it's time that people need to take not a scalpel, but an axe or a hatchet to these budgets and cut unnecessary spending. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Well, anyone else that would like to address the board? Well, the public address session is closed. Do we have an addendum, Mr. Meadows?
No, sir, we do not.
Okay, no addendum. Next item is consent agenda.
So move.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion, any items? Please call the roll.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Gabriel?
Aye.
Mr. Creed?
Aye.
Ms. Perkins?
Aye.
Mr. Brown?
Aye.
6 ayes.
Need a motion to go into work session.
So moved.
Second.
And the call the roll, please.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Gabriel?
Aye.
Mr. Creed?
Aye.
Ms. Perkins?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Mr. Brown?
Aye.
6 ayes.
And the two items that we will be discussing in work session is the Home Consortium Agreement and the FY 2014 budget. I guess, Mr. Sandy, you up?
Yep.
Yes, sir. I'm going to give you just a brief overview of the Home Consortium. I think we have a couple of new members since the last time we were required to update the agreement that we have. It's a 3-year agreement that the different localities have to join together in this consortium. So I'm just going to hit some of the highlights. The full presentation is in your packet. So I won't go through every single piece of it, but just to kind of give you an idea, it does, the purpose of the consortium is to address regional affordable housing needs based on the priorities of each community. And those communities are Giles, Montgomery, Pulaski, Floyd, City of Bradford, as well as the towns that are within those counties. It was formed in 2007, so now we're about 6 years in, coming up on 6 years, so it's our second renewal that you'll be asked to make a decision on renewing. In the last 6 years, the Home Consortium has 189 homes and apartments have been built using these funds. They've been rehabilitated or in the development process, and then just kind of a breakdown on those is 46 of those were in Pulaski County, 16 in Radford, 31 in Giles County, and then 96 in Montgomery County. And the Home Consortium has been able to leverage about $3 million for the 189 units, and it's assisted to bring in $13.5 million to the communities using other funds, so kind of leveraging other grant opportunities and funds. And the ratio is about $5.10 to every dollar of home funds that has been able to bring in. There is a board of directors that meets with representation from each of the localities. There's a list of them here. I won't go through each one, but there's a meet periodically to discuss funding and different agreements as part of the Home Consortium and the HUD requirements. So it is regional cooperation that this program is, and really what what it does is each of these localities get home funds. What this program does is it allows you to pool the resources together, and what the consortium has done has operated on a rotating basis. So just as an example, Floyd County by itself doesn't really get enough in one particular year to really do a project. So what the consortium does is builds that up over a period of 5 or 6 years till they have enough of those funds accumulated to do a significant project. Pulaski County may have one next year, Floyd the year after, City of Radford after that, and so on, just to kind of pool those funds each year. So the home funds are flexible. They're used for home ownership, rentals. They can be single family, multifamily. They can be brand new construction. It can be rehabilitation as part of that. So here's just a few projects in Radford. Some of the funds have been used for revitalizing the downtown with mixed use. The old Hudson building, if you remember where that is, now it's the River City Grill, and there's an office complex in there. That was done with home funds through the City of Radford, and Taylor Hollow Companies is the company that did that work. They have some rental units in there, and they're affordable rents, $450 to $550, and this is just some pictures of some of those structures. Here's another before and after type pictures of renovations that were done by Taylor Hollow in Radford. This is the Wheeler Furniture Company building in Narrows, which is also rehabilitation of a vacant building. There's affordable apartments above, and then the actual town offices of Narrows are on the first floor. And that's another project that's done by Taylor Hollow Construction, which is Joe Fortier. In Pulaski County, they've done the Dora Highway Neighborhood Project, which was a revitalization project, the Baskerville neighborhood, as well as in Floyd, they've done the Newtown neighborhood improvement. And again, just some pictures of, some work done by small local contractors, renovating and rehabilitating some of these houses, removing some older houses and rebuilding. Infrastructure improvements is also part of this, along with CDBG funds. And here just recently, the Home Consortium has started to partner with Habitat for Humanity. So there's 2 new homes in Blacksburg that are going to be completed sometime this summer, working with them and using home funds. In Christiansburg, the Linden Green 88-unit apartment complex was renovated about a year or 2 ago. And Community Housing Partners is actually has acquired that property and manages that property now. And all the units have the HUD subsidy that allow tenants to only pay 30% of their income. And here's just a whole list of sustainable building features and green energy efficiency items that are found in a lot of these structures that are being rehabilitated. Part of the process is to rehabilitate these structures, and hopefully through that, reduce their energy bills. A lot of these places have real old windows, drafty doors, drafty windows, not much insulation, those kind of things. So as part of the rehab project is to try to make the homes a little more energy efficient and reduce their costs that they have on a monthly basis. There's also some new affordable for sale homes. These are some in the Blacksburg area, and these through the home program, the preference is given to people that either work or live in Montgomery County for these particular structures. The Cedar Hill homes, these were done a few years ago, and this was what they call the speed build, was done in a couple months, and this was part of the Ryan Clark project that was done, one of the victims of the shooting at Virginia Tech. And the Cedar Hill homes is out there towards the Ellett Valley, and again, just some of the energy efficiency aspects of those homes. New duplex homes that Community Housing Partners is building for low and moderate incomes. And again, these are the preference for these homes or households that live or work in Montgomery County are given the first preference for purchasing those homes. This is in Rich Creek. This is a assisted living project that's being developed there in Rich Creek for seniors. And it's 23 private rooms, taking an old building and renovating that. This is Grissom Lane, another senior housing project in the Blacksburg area for low-income seniors. Just another recent thing is that New River Home Consortium has become an intermediary through the energy efficiency grants, and that's approved by Freedom First Credit Union is who that's worked through. So that's just some real highlights of the program and some of the things that have been done over the last 6 years. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have. The projects that we've done in the county have primarily been in the town of Christiansburg and town of Blacksburg. We are kind of trying to identify a project in the county right now that we can use at the next cycle of funds, which will be next year for Montgomery County. So if you have any input or feedback on potential projects there, we can do several things. We can take an existing building to renovate, such as was done in Radford, something like that in an old vacant building. We don't have as many of those because we don't have kind of a downtown area. Or you can do a neighborhood revitalization program type of thing like Pulaski and Floyd have done, where on a voluntary basis you approach people and see if they're interested in participating in the program. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Again, the primary reason for the discussion is the June, I guess it's July 1, the program is up for its next 3 years of renewal, and the county has to opt in by April 1st on whether or not they want to participate for another 3 years in the program. And I believe there's a resolution on the under new business to that effect.
Questions or comments from the board members?
Let's say it just seems like a really wonderful program.
Steve, can I ask, it wasn't covered in the presentation, but is there any financial obligation to the county for participating in this program?
There is not. I will say that with a lot of other things, the funds that are trickling down are diminishing each year from the federal program. So we're seeing the last couple of years, we've seen less and less funding that we're receiving, which means just fewer number of projects that can be done through this program. And I did fail to mention that Blacksburg is kind of the lead entity that kind of administers and runs this program through their housing program, along with they partner with the Planning District Commission to run the program and administer the home funds, and they act as the lead fiscal agent as well.
So just a small kind of, just as a newbie question, is there a reason that the town of Christiansburg isn't involved? Do they choose not to be, or?
To this point, they've chosen not to be formally participating, but we did do some projects in Christiansburg, so they've seen benefit from it. To be honest, I don't know the reason that they haven't formally participated. Back 6 years ago when we started, they chose not to formally participate.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Sandy? Thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Steve.
This the next item in the work session is FY Budget 2014.
Mr. Chairman, we have this on the agenda tonight. We know that as an item of new business, we have a resolution tonight to establish an advertised real estate tax rate and fiscal year 14 budget amount. Just to remind the board again, that is simply to set an advertised rate. You can't go above what is set, but you can certainly go below that later. We have this work session on the agenda tonight to give you the opportunity to ask any questions that you may have in regard to that. Mark Magruder and Angie Hill are both here to help answer any questions if you have any specific questions. We also have the slideshow presentation from the budget presentation last Monday night, if there was anything in particular from the presentation last Monday night that you wanted to discuss, but mainly this was an open-ended time for some discussion. So
I just wanted to clarify one thing. A couple of our speakers talked about $2 million in growth, or 2.6, but actually, as I understand it, was $2.8 million based on the budget presentation. Is that correct?
Any other questions?
I have some questions, but I'll ask them now. Just some specific things, if you don't mind. On page 79 of the budget, there's a discussion about, what section is this? This is for county administration, and there's a requested increase for the county health clinic, an addition of 4 hours per week. Is there something that was driving that request to increase the hours in the of the health clinic? A request by employees or perhaps?
Yeah.
It's basically related to the usage of the clinic.
Okay.
And so I think in the beginning, the goal was to get 100% employee utilization so that, the ultimate goal is to reduce our healthcare costs.
Sure.
And so the more people you get into the clinic, the healthier, they will be, things like that. And so when we originally put the budget in, there wasn't enough money for 100% utilization because we didn't have 100% utilization. And as time has gone on and more people have become part of the health clinic, the number of hours have expanded. And so we're trying to address that need, to address the amount of specific client hours that are being utilized.
So we foresee that the increase, that there's a demand to fill that.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I've got one question. I had it wrote down at the house, but I don't have it with me. How much is that per hour?
I don't have that for you, but I can get it.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that either. I know that HealthStat, the company that provides the nurse practitioner for us, sets the rate based on the number of
Well, it
hours.
shouldn't be real hard. It's 80. What was the
Yeah,
figure?
it'd be, it's like 70.
It was,
Have a calculator here.
Per month?
Well, it's 4 hours per week
4 hours
times
per week
52
and
weeks,
80
right?
some-
So that's 208 hours. It's about $81 an hour. If my calculator does that sound about right? Yeah, it's rounded, but
Somewhere around $80 an hour.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything other than the nurse getting paid out of that?
well, we pay, because we utilize HealthStat as the agency, every penny of that doesn't go straight to her. I'm sure there's some administrative cost from HealthStat that they add into that.
There's some administrative costs,
I
did
don't
you
think
say?
so.
Probably. The agreement is with HealthStat. It's not directly with the nurse practitioner. She's employed by HealthStat.
Oh, okay.
So when we increase the hours or ask for an increase in hours, it's billed through them to
So we
us.
really don't know how much she is getting per hour.
That's true.
We don't know what we're paying for that.
What her rate? No, sir.
And those are two things that we need to know. We really should know, how much she gets paid and how much HealthStat is charging us for doing the.
We have that information. I think what the county administrator is trying to say is that it's, even though it's $83 or whatever that number rolled out to be, there's more involved than just the individual cost of her, because there are specific health fees that HealthStat charges that are rolled into the total. So that dollar amount that is being paid out to her is not directly her salary.
And I understand that.
So
but
we can get you a
I'd
breakdown
like to
of
know how
what
much
her
HealthStat
salary
is
is.
getting.
Sure.
I'm not worried as much about her salary as I am about other charges that we may
I
have.
understand.
Yeah, we can get you a detailed breakdown for that.
This sort of goes
Okay. Mary-
with Matt's
Mary?
thing. I think I brought this up last year, but are we still looking at the cost benefit of having this as it relates to the cost of health insurance for employees? Like, at the beginning we said it would probably take a few years to determine that it was really providing sort of a cost savings on the other side. So I just wondered if we had any updated information about that.
I did not have anything for you this evening, but we can take a look at that and get back to you as to where we are.
And we can also, we've got a meeting on the 19th, dedicated, this whole purpose of the meeting is to talk about health insurance. We'll talk to our HR person and try to get some of that as well.
Okay, Matt?
Just one more question about health insurance, and I have some other questions as well. I know that the county administrator's proposed budget, it had an estimate for the increase in health insurance costs. Do we have any updates on update estimate? Not at this time. Okay.
No, matter of fact, we've asked them to hold that until we meet next week. They're still working on information.
Okay. Okay. I have some other things. So.
You have some other questions?
Sure. Yeah.
Help yourself.
Okay.
I yield my time to you.
Thank you. On page, 162 of the budget, there's it's the fire and rescue operating budgets. I'm just curious if and we're not going to deal with it today, but if the proposed revenue sharing for the town of Christiansburg goes through, or the cost, whatever it's called.
None of that's reflected.
None of that's reflected. Will it affect the budgets at all?
No, sir. Not from the county standpoint.
Not from the county standpoint.
No, sir.
Okay. So the budgets will stay the same, but then town of Christiansburg would have a whole lot. Well,
some additional revenues if they implement that, yes.
Okay, and so it might affect next year's budget because they would be funding their rescue squad to a level well above what they initially they would be up until this point.
It's a possibility, but I don't think we base, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't base our funding for the two towns' rescue squads on what the towns fund. We fund those independent of that. In other words, if the town could generate a large amount of additional revenue, and I'm sure that would be a conversation among this board to look at the funding levels.
Okay.
I wouldn't necessarily recommend you cut it. That would be a policy decision as opposed to a...
Sure. Okay, so next year, should this pass, should that recovery pass, should it be implemented, and they are gaining some revenue and supplementing the budget from the town side, that is something that this board could decide to deal with next year?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I got that. Thank you. Let's see. This is on page 187, which is the social services budget. And I am just...
what page? 187.
I'm just a little unclear on the county funding for social services metric. It seems like there's a significant decrease, and it might be because there's an increase in state funding? Because there's some sort of... No?
No, basically what we do each year is we reconcile to the state's budget, and when we do that reconciliation, we bring that to you generally in the fall of the year, and that becomes their base target. And so essentially what is going on in social services is the only monies that have been removed are for purchase of service or public assistance, which is directly tied to state funding. So, for example, there is a local match requirement on each one of those categories. And so when the state decides to eliminate or reduce the amount of purchase of service or public assistance monies that comes to the county, then we don't have to provide our local match as well. And so what you're seeing there is basically $600,000 in state monies that went away. And so not only did those state monies go away, but our local match that was required on those state monies went away.
Okay. And so what was that state money that went away this year?
I don't have the breakdown for you, but I can certainly give that to you as to it's each one of they have what they call 800 codes in there for a whole host of different categories of services that are provided, and they're direct services that are provided. And so essentially the state just dictates what they're going to provide funding for and the local match requirement that's there.
Okay, so I guess my concern is that are we forced to reduce services to our citizens because of this cut in funding?
Well, it wouldn't be something that the county would be required to pick up.
Okay.
And so, it would be services that were agreed upon at the state level that are no longer going to be provided. So it's not just our locality that's being affected by it, it's everybody in the state that is being affected by it.
Okay, so this is a state level decision to terminate some service, and okay.
Exactly. So it has nothing to do with the localities decision involved. In other words, if the state doesn't provide the money for the program, then the program no longer exists.
Okay. All right. I would appreciate an update on what
Yeah.
exactly
I can
what's
tell
being
you
changed.
exactly
Sure.
how those things went down.
That'd be great. That'd be great. Let's see. The only other kind of general questions, just based on some questions that were raised during public comment. Just so we're clear, did personal property revenue increase or decrease over this?
It increased.
Okay. By how much? Roughly.
I think off the top of my head, it was about $1 million.
Okay. Did sales tax revenue, to the best of your knowledge, increase or decrease over the past year?
Increased.
It increased. Okay. And this is more towards the county administrator, but are all available properties being marketed at this current time?
Yes, in some form or fashion, yes.
Okay. And to the best of your knowledge, did unemployment in Montgomery County increase or decrease over the past year?
I have a chart on that. I'm not sure off the top of my head, but
Did you say unemployment? Yeah, decreased.
It decreased.
Decreased.
Yeah, by about 0.4%.
I don't have the specific numbers, but I'll look at them. It decreased.
Yeah, I know the answer. I just wanted that on record.
62.
Okay.
It's
About
It's
62.
5.2 in Montgomery County as well as of December.
Somewhere around
Yeah.
between those two numbers,
it has
5.2 and 60.
Yeah. Those are all the questions, and I had some kind of thoughts about the budget, but I'll yield to somebody else. I'll yield to somebody else for a little bit.
Harry?
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, like, I understood, like, on page 10 of the revenue summary, we have in the cash flow reserve $21.2 million, or 12.6% of the total FY14 budget for emergency and unforeseen circumstances, and that is based on the advice from our financial planners. Is that correct? Okay, so that's there. Okay, then we have no money in our debt service reserve, right?
that's correct.
Okay, now the money that we have in our landfill post-closure reserve, the $250,000, that is rolled over, right? We didn't spend it last year, so
Right.
it's this year.
That's right.
The facilities and maintenance reserve, $723,000, that is from before, none was spent, it stays, none's added,
just
right?
like a savings account. Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
and the same for the capital reserve of $500,000?
That's correct.
And the same for the technology reserve of $564,904?
That was increased this year based upon the leftover monies that were in the IT budget at year end.
So,
So there's an agreement that between the board and that particular department that any leftover monies that exist
put in the reserve?
are automatically put in the
Added
reserve
to the
at the end of
reserve.
the year.
That's correct.
Okay. And then in the rainy day reserve, we have $1 million.
That's correct.
That's right.
Okay, now, oh, this is, well, I'm not sure about in the computer, because I have my, I always do bear with my paper budget.
Ms. Biggs?
It's on page 10 and 11 under revenue
10 and
summary.
11.
You're
But I-
on 10 and 11?
But I don't know what page it is in there,
It's the same as,
because I couldn't find the other pages they were
I
talking
can't
about.
find it in here.
The
But
pages,
Stephanie told
if
me
you
that-
down,
Page 52 of the PDF.
Yeah,
if you
What?
download it, and
52 of the PDF.
yeah.
Okay.
if you bring it into iBooks,
Yeah.
it numbers the
See,
pages.
I like
Yes.
to write on mine.
So my numbers that I was saying made no sense to anybody,
Well,
except to myself. Yeah.
well,
Okay, fair enough.
I figured it out, but yes.
Okay.
Okay, so to make it clear then, there are no other monies floating around anywhere.
Well, that, I wouldn't say that there's no other monies. We provide you with a cash sheet that shows you how much money you have, and these are the amounts that have been set aside. There is an amount of unreserved, undesignated monies that sits at year end.
And how, do we know how much that is?
We can tell
We
you.
sure do.
Do you know I was going to ask that question?
We had a suspicion we may get into that discussion. That's about the only thing that was working. Is that
Just to go back to the unemployment rates, there's a whole section right up on that on
Thank
page
you.
3 of the revenue summary. So I didn't want to quote something without actually having it in front of me.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'll just start at the beginning of this sheet. This is Ms. Perkins' favorite sheet of all, the one that
Yes.
talks about cash to accrual basis accounting.
I enjoy this sheet.
The reason that we provide you with the first page is so that you can crosswalk fund balance to cash that's available. So we start with the audited fund balance number on the far left-hand side of the page. And as we talk about from time to time, fund balance is not the same as cash because it has accrual items in it. Revenue that we have earned but have not collected is included in that number. And if we have liabilities that we've incurred but not paid yet, accounts payable and that kind of thing, that is reduced from the number. Do you want me to go?
Well, there is one correction on block A. Did the zero fall off at the right side of that number? Isn't that 40,154,000?
400, yes.
It's 420.
It's 40,154,420.
Yeah, the zero on.
3, the zero was left off.
Just a zero.
Well, it's an important zero.
It's place value. It's in the
That's
ones.
right, it's in the ones place. That's
It's
right.
very important.
It
Thank
is
you.
important.
I've
But
heard
it
that
moves
before.
everything else up.
So if you go across the page, and if you want to crosswalk this with your audited financial statements at some point, you can do that. But it adjusts for those accrual items that I was speaking of. And then when we bring our budget to you, we're just talking about the general fund budget. But for accounting purposes, we put some other small funds in with the general fund for the report, like the law library is included in that. And flexible spending funds, that's people's FSA accounts that they've contributed but have not used yet for their flexible spending. And debt service, we don't have a debt service reserve right now, as Supervisor Biggs said, but we have set aside pennies previously that are used to shave off the current debt service. Those are in a different fund, so we don't talk about them in this, but that's what walks you across to the ending number, which is $37 million. Then if you go to the next page, I think that we gave you this sheet, just the second sheet in the fall. So Carol and I worked on this a month or so ago. In order to make it a little bit clearer to see, we put the items in blue or the changes, so it's easier to crosswalk that to the last time we presented this to you. The second column, $3.8 million, is the amount that has been designated or appropriated already for specific purposes through the end of January. So that money has already been spent, so to speak. Then the next number, 21.2, is the cash flow reserve. And the way we come up with that number is we look at the most recent 24-month period, and we see what our low point in cash is because of we get our big tax collections twice a year. We have to have enough cash to cover payroll and other cash flow expenses before those big collections come in.
And that's the same money that's over here in the budget?
Yes.
The
I wouldn't look at-
21.2?
Yes.
That we have, that you're talking about? Okay.
Yes, that's correct. The next number, 4.155, is reserves that Supervisor Biggs was speaking of earlier. And then the next column is $4.1 million. That's the windfall. And some of those monies have already been spent
Or appropriated.
or appropriated, not necessarily
Right.
spent, but appropriated. And there are also some recommended uses for those funds that hasn't been acted on yet by this board. That action that you have taken included one-time funding for the county of about $4 million, $65,000 for the Joinder study, and $750,000 for one-time items by the schools. And then other recommended uses would be a capital reserve, increasing the facility maintenance, and then establishing a fuel reserve, a compensatory time reserve for the sheriff's office, and $1 million for the animal shelter,
Which
that did get acted on since then.
That's correct.
If you walk that across the page, you end up with 3.997, or basically $4 million. That is a lower number than we presented to you before, because things have happened since then. Things have happened since the fall when we presented that to you. So if you look right here at the bottom left, that summarizes the changes since the last time this was presented.
So the short answer to the question, as far as any additional funds, the two columns on the right, the first one is the one-time money from last year's tax increase, which was about the 4.1 million. About $1.1 million, $1.2 million of that's already been appropriated. We did establish the animal shelter reserve for $1 million. The remaining items were the capital reserve, the facility and maintenance reserve, fuel reserve, comp time reserve, were funding areas that we recommended that you reserve, but they haven't been formally acted on yet. That means that money's still available, but it's not been formally reserved.
Right, so like when I look on page 11, I see capital reserve 500,000 from before.
That's what's over.
Okay, and then this is additional, right?
That would be an additional.
That 915,000 is additional if the board decides that that's what you want to do with it. If you don't designate that money before June 30th for a particular reserve, it simply falls to fund balance and becomes part of the county's overall savings, if you will.
And the same for the 750,000?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And we did set aside the 1 million for the animal shelter. What about did we set aside the fuel and the?
No, ma'am. It's
okay.
The money's available, but it has not been formally designated.
Okay. So those four things, those are your recommendations, but it's still there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
The other sheet that I handed out to you is just a different format of this. This is a picture, this is like accountant talk right here. So for different kinds of people that think a different way, that's what that shows. And at the bottom of that page, it summarizes what the current reserves are and then what the additional dollars would be to show you what the total would end up to be.
Yeah, this sheet is the one that I had told Angie I thought may be helpful as well. The first two sheets are more a picture form. These show the top of this spreadsheet, if you will, shows the one-time money, the $4,131,000. It shows the things that have been reserved and the areas that were recommended to be reserved. And as you see, when you come down to the balance of $2,900, all those areas have either been reserved or recommended. The undesignated cash balance of $5,671,878, that was the number we started with earlier in the year. And what's reflected are the changes that the board has taken action on since the beginning of the year to bring it down to that current $3,997,863, and that ties back to your, as I call it, the picture sheet. And then just a summary of all the reserves to date are at the bottom of the page. And those reserves currently total $7 million.
And as we always reiterate, these funds are there one time, one time. They're not an ongoing source of revenue, so they can't, it's not wise to use them for ongoing costs, because if you include them in the budget as an ongoing cost, then next year there will be a hole to make up to generate those funds again, because once they're spent, they're gone.
The example I've always used are these reserves are basically your various savings accounts for various activities, and you can certainly take money out of your savings account to address certain things, but as Angie said, they're non-recurring, so that if you spend them, they're gone until you replenish them in some other form or fashion.
But this 7 million this is a separate amount than the.
No.
See,
Are you looking at this number, 7 million right here?
Yes.
It's basically, if you add the reserves in this column of your paper, And then down here, what we're recommending to go into the reserves, that will equal the $7 million.
These
But
numbers
less the
here.
400,000 for the Christian, or for the the schools maintenance, which we allocated.
Well, that's actually in the reserve.
It's still in the reserve?
It's still in the reserve because we haven't formally written the check out to them yet to give it to them.
The date for this was the 31st of January, not, I think we
Yeah,
voted
that'll-
on that
afterwards.
We didn't plan on doing this till late this afternoon, so we didn't update for that.
I'm not, I was just pointing it out.
Right, that's right.
Okay, but we still, even with, now let me get this straight. Even with the 7 million, we still have the 21.2 million
Yes.
that's set aside for
Cash
if we
flow.
were having just a terrible
No, it's not for a
anything
terrible.
to pay the bills if something were to happen.
It's not, we have to have that to pay the bills because of when the tax payments come in. It's not like an emergency fund. It is,
It's to keep from going negative in the checking account at a
Right.
certain point during the year. We collect an amount of revenue, and then our low point during the year, we project we need 21.2 million in the bank to be able to cover everything.
that's based on the last 24 months.
Okay, so I'm confused because it says budget for emergency and unforeseen circumstances to ensure sufficient cash to pay bills. On the thing in the budget, it says that. So I'm
In the revenue summary,
Yeah, on page 10. It says the 21.2 million or 12.6% of the total FY14 budget for emergency and unforeseen circumstances to ensure sufficient cash to pay the bills. So now that's not what I'm hearing. So get me straight on what is this money for?
it is to pay the bills because of the timing of the cycle of how we collect cash versus when we have to pay it out. It's like if you get paid personally at the beginning of the month, you have to be able to pay your bills through the entire month. And if all your bills come due at the end of the month and you get paid at the beginning, you can't spend that money at the beginning of the month or you won't have enough to pay your bills at the end of the month.
So why do we have emergency and unforeseen circumstances then? Why wouldn't it just read this for to pay the bills?
It could.
It should say that.
Okay.
Basically,
It's the worst case. I guess it's the worst case if things follow like they have for the past 24 months and the collections come in just like they have. It's the worst case of how much money you would need to cover the bills. And that generally happens in October and I guess April. That's when the low, or maybe May, that's when the low points come. I think that's what we mean by the unforeseen circumstances, is if it's the very worst, that's how much we would need. And I have a chart that I can send out to you too that shows the change in the cash.
Okay, so let me get this straight. We're now saying that that's to pay the bills. So like, if we have a disaster then...
That's more what your reserves
Then we either have to go to the reserve fund or this, whatever this, the $7 million is over here.
That's the only
That is the
reserve.
reserve.
That is a reserve. This is not a reserve.
This
It
is
is poorly titled.
It's cash flow.
Cash flow reserve.
It is a cash flow reserve.
Right, but I think that's an accounting term, if I'm not mistaken.
It's a
not a
reserve.
board designated reserve. It is not a board designated
Right.
reserve. It is our cash flow reserve. That's right.
Right, okay. And
Which is
it's been
an
a long time
which is an
since I had-
operating reserve,
Right.
not capital.
And it is an important practice, something that the bond rating agencies look at. Because if you didn't do that, and sometimes that happens to localities, sometimes
borrow
people have to borrow money
Right.
to pay their payroll at the end of that cycle. We certainly would not want to do
see,
that.
I understand that, but what I'm trying to get straight in my brain, and I really want to get this straight because you don't know how many people are out there asking this question, okay? And I got to be able to explain it because they say, you're sitting on millions of dollars, why are you asking for more, okay?
Right.
So I want to be able to say, okay, we have to have $21.2 million in order to pay our bills, period.
That's right. That is
It
right.
has nothing to do with emergencies or unforeseen circumstances like we have printed in this budget.
The reason I think it says that in the budget is, and I agree with what Angie said, and we'll certainly change the wording, but over the last 24 months, when you look at our monthly expenditures, taking into account all the items that have gone through those last 24 months, that 21.2 million is what we need to maintain a positive checking account, if you will. So that doesn't include catastrophic things.
Right, and that's what we need to separate out. So then if something happened, then we have like our rainy day fund of $1 million. We have different reserve funds, like if our whole technology just failed, we could go to the technology reserve. Then we've got this other money that isn't necessarily designated in, I guess, specific things, or we haven't said we want it for these things, that's sort of over here. And this is different. This is different pot of money.
The $4 million at the end?
Mhm.
Yes,
Yes.
that's correct.
Is what, the 4 million at the end is what?
It's, after we took off all those other things, that's what's left at the end.
So that's, when it all's said and done, we have $4 million.
Well, you also have $915,000 that's been recommended to go into increased capital reserves.
Right.
You also have $750,000 that's also been recommended for facility maintenance
No,
reserves.
you're talking about two different things. So,
No.
Right.
Yeah, Annette was asking if we have $4 million, and what you're reading is part of that $4 million.
Right.
Yeah, and so what's
No, that
happening
was
is on
subtracted out.
this sheet, which is the one-page thing, is that there's $2.8 million, which we had set aside, it's in the bank. And then from last year, we added $4.2 million to that, for a
Right.
total of $7 million. Now, within that, we've divided this up into kind of sub-accounts, different things, and some of them we haven't actually done that, and it's just kind of
Haven't
sitting.
formally allocated.
Yeah, it's just kind of sitting in a pot. And we can subdivide it if we want to, or we can just let it sit in the pot. So the total amount of reserves that we have for things like capital, landfill costs, facilities maintenance, technology, graveyard, rainy day fund, revenue sharing with VDOT, Line of Duty Act, fuel reserve, compensatory time for the sheriff, the animal shelter, and then the schools maintenance is $7 million. Yes.
$7 million.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's what I'm trying,
And
that's what I wanted to.
And that's not
to
an
know.
annual revenue, that is what's in the
That's-
savings account. That's correct.
If we didn't put any money into that, that would stay at the same amount.
Okay, that's correct, 7 million. Is
Yes.
that correct?
Yes,
When you put everything together.
yes.
And if you take those things out, it's 4 million?
Yes, that's right. When you take those out, they come out over here, and
Right.
then you end up with the 4 million.
Right.
That's right, yes.
So everything there that was taken out was 4 million left, but all total reserves, 7 million.
Right, we haven't acted on all of those, but including the recommendations,
Right,
that's
right.
correct. And then this ends up with about almost 4 million.
And
Yes.
Right.
And what happens, and this is a good point, I think, to make, what happens if the board doesn't do anything more for the rest of the year? Excuse me. The $3,997,863, thank you. The $4 million basically just falls, if you will, to the general fund balance of the county. It's not spent for anything, it's not allocated for anything,
Right.
it just adds to the county's fund balance. Now, that money is available later if you want to come back and reserve some of that for whatever purpose, but
And because it says down here at the bottom on the first long page is revised balance is close to the $4 million.
yes, ma'am, that's,
So you got that just sitting in your budget.
that money is, that money is in fund balance that's not been allocated for any specific purpose. It's
And
not,
It's not part of the 21,200.
No, ma'am, that's a separate-
It's just sitting
Right,
there
that's
in
right.
case you need it.
yes, ma'am, and
Because we can't use the 21.2 for that,
No.
or then we couldn't pay the bills like
Right,
Ms.
I know.
Fink said. Yes.
I know that. But I'm just saying that when all is said and done, the 4 million is in the general fund. is
Yes, ma'am. It's in the
there
general
To be
fund. Right.
used
If
if
needed, if
necessary.
needed.
But if you count everything together, it's 7 million. But when you separated out all the rest of it, it's 4
It's
million.
11. It's
Yeah.
11. If the 7
Yeah,
plus
11
the-
and
yes.
4. All right, right, okay. 7 plus the 4 will
Right.
equal 11, right, all righty. Got it.
I have a question if I could. Under the revenue sharing VDOT, it's got a total of $551,500. Is that designated to any place?
Yes, sir. That's the 500,000 that was set aside by the board within the last year, I think, to several road projects that were identified.
That's the one that Politis got half of it? And
Yes, sir.
I got half of it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And the 51.5 is the money that's just been, they've never finished.
Do we know if we're going to get matching funds for that?
I don't want to correct you, but the way that sounded like Politis got half of it and you got half of it, in regards to that might come across as
To those particular districts.
There were two districts that needed to be addressed.
My district got half of it and
Yeah.
Politis did, but it does us no good to get half of it, we don't get the other half from VDOT.
Well, and Steve, you might can help with that. We've submitted it. It's on the list for revenue sharing matching money. The issue with that is just like it's been with the ones we've set in prior years. It just depends on when VDOT gets around to the project as to when we have to write the checks out of the reserve for that.
And I understand that, but the only thing I'm saying is that you got to count that as something that's going to be spent.
Yes, sir. It's going to go away at some point.
It'll make your 7 million there to 6.5 million.
Well, if I can add to that comment, I think that's a very important point. The money that's set aside in capital reserve, in all these various reserves, is not there for eternity. I mean, it's there for certain needs. I mean, the auto graveyard fund, for example, it has 124,000 in it. At some point, we will probably be called on because of some of the old junkyards in the county to have to address that. Well, rather than having to take that out of operating revenue when that happens, we've got a reserve set aside for it. Some of these other reserves, the revenue sharing fund, all of these are set aside to be used. They're not set aside just to set aside money.
Except for the rainy day fund, more of it.
Which is a cushion if it's needed. Right. Thank you. That's a good point.
Something I wanted to ask David about, and I didn't. He said there's a road, Craig Street Road, which is in the district. It's probably the only place I needed funds. When he says they're going to do work on that, where is that? Is that money coming out of his money?
Yes.
But not out of ours?
No, that's not a revenue
Okay, I just want to be
We
sure.
finally got a little something on here, we want to finish that project.
Yes, I think we'd like to finish that project, but
Yeah, that's out of
I just
VDOT's
wanted to
money.
be sure. I felt that was correct, but
That's just like the one over in Campbell that there's no money been set aside for that. That's their project. That's good, man.
okay.
Is that
Well, that
helping? Okay.
makes sense then. Thank you. And thank you for my favorite sheets.
Well, we actually had the spreadsheet done earlier, but then, as Angie said, my crystal ball told me that we might need to be ready for this discussion tonight. So,
I don't know what the test is, but I guess for me, this makes sense. For you, this makes sense.
this is the one I like.
That makes sense to me.
Okay, I was wondering if we could also put these up on the web, if that
Sure.
would be possible for folks to be able to look at.
Although we have to realize that none of this is set until we do the budget, right?
Well, no.
A lot of it's not set, right?
well,
Some of it is, but
some of the designations that were recommended here. This is not part of my budget presentation.
Right.
This is actually separate, and some of the recommendations that had been made earlier, the board can take action on those at any time. It doesn't
Yeah,
have to be a
that's-
part of the budget.
I just didn't want people to think that it was set in stone, that,
No.
right now it is.
If we put it up, I guess now, it could cause confusion, right?
Well, I think the reserve fund is up to, this is as of January the 13th, or the 31st.
It's adopted, and in the case of a couple of those, of the capital fund, the facilities fund, we've shown the money that was recommended to be added to those, but that's not.
Okay, all right, so perhaps that would be
Yeah,
confusing.
that's what I was thinking, because if we put it
note-
up there.
We could note that. The ones that are recommended, we can asterisk or
I mean,
whatever.
here we are sitting in a public meeting talking about it, and we're talking about, we're not going to put it there, and it's on TV, and it's in the newspaper, and we're talking about it. Now, if it's confusing, you just make it so it's not confusing, because if it's confusing to me, it's going to be confusing if you just tune in, but there's a way to make it so people understand.
I can update it through tonight's meeting and then send it to you guys, and if you give your okay, then we'll put it up. But we could update it through tonight, and we can mark which things have had action taken on them and which have not.
Which are pending.
That's what I was going to say, that's what you...
Right.
Okay.
That's great.
That's
Thanks,
fine.
Angie.
And I think that helps to explain out in the general public when people keep saying, why do you need this, or why are you doing that when you have money? Well, that's a legitimate question to ask. And so you need to explain it's the citizens' money. We're citizens too. It's our money. So we need to have it so people can understand it. You know? I mean, that's just the way it should be. That's my opinion, sorry.
Well, I guess it's a good thing that we have reserves, because there are a
Yes, ma'am.
great number of counties that don't have reserves. And we've been fairly fiscally conservative, but that doesn't mean that you don't necessarily need to go out and add to your accounts, because we were talking about $2 million to be set aside for the 2 pennies to be set aside for
School capital.
school projects, which
Well-
we know we're going to have, and so that may help us to keep from borrowing money in the future and spiking another tax increase
Thank
like
you.
we
That-
had to do.
Thank you.
So-
That was the entire reason that I recommended what I did in the budget. Yes,
So
ma'am.
it's really 1.4 million?
It's 1.4 million. Yes, ma'am.
1.4 million.
And I'm sorry, I was just
Well, I
going
was just going to say, the other thing that we have to remember that keeps coming back to haunt us is the fact that we have real needs as far as, one-time only money needs and maintenance all over the county, or we could have another situation, God forbid, that we have another roof fall in. So you always have to remember things like that, and I think we've all experienced what can happen. So I think it's good that we have this, but I think that it needs to be so people can understand why it's here.
Bill, I need to ask a question.
Ms. Perkins?
Wait a minute. It just went right out of my brain.
Think a minute and let me get one in right quick. I heard one of the speakers talk about the $1 million that we set aside for the animal shelter. And for clarification for who may be viewing at home, because he asked will the ground have been broken, et cetera, et cetera. But Mr. Meadows, could you, I think it's seed money for...
is, and I'm going to look one more left. I know Ms. Biggs has met with some of the staff to talk about some fundraising and some programs to get that moving
Right,
forward.
that's the seed money, but we still need more money. And what we were trying to do is come with some ideas about how we might go about involving interested citizens that have a real interest in the animal shelter and have fundraising skills that might be able to help us to sort of get organized, and because we really need to act on this. So it's not like nothing is being done, but it's it's a process where you have all volunteers working on it. So on that aspect of it. So if there's anyone out there that has a particular interest or is into fundraising, we could use your help. And in the meantime, we've had people ask about giving money, and I'm going to turn that back over to Mr. Meadows, because he did suggest a way that money could be given if someone was impatient and didn't want to wait but really wanted to go ahead and make a donation, because we've actually had that question asked.
There's several ways folks can do that. We
Sounds
can,
like a commercial.
they can write a check to the county and we'll set it aside in a reserve. We've also had a discussion about setting up a 501c3 or some group to provide a conduit for funding as well. But certainly would welcome that, and I believe the primary reason the board went ahead and set aside was the $1 million was to show that the board has the initiative and desire to see that move forward, and now we're depending on folks in the private sector to help step up and begin to help match some of that money.
Something they could do, and I'll just put this out because I've thought about it a little bit, and I would think that you could take all the people who have dogs in the county, which is a buku bunch of them, and have a walk, run type
Fundraiser.
marathon or whatever you want to call it, for a mile or what, and let them get donations for every mile they run or for every so much. And I think I've seen small venues get in $5,000-$10,000, and if you got it countywide, something that everybody could get in on, I can see you getting $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 just in a day's time. So that's, and it could be more than that, just according to who was contacted and you got interested in it.
It's a good idea.
And the other thing, Gary, is it gives exposure to what the need is for. I mean, the advertisement for the run, walk, or however long they may be, and where the proceeds are going.
Them having their dogs with them.
Yeah.
You know, when they could all run together. And people would actually, I believe, come out and to see people going by with all the different type dogs that people have. It's would be kind of like a dog show rolled into something that I can see it working very well.
Yeah, like a Parks and Rec sort of, it could even involve Parks and Rec because it's exercising people too. And like they have the dog swim at the Frog Pond, it's sort of the same idea, except the money would be, you know, for them.
You could even take some of the pound dogs that were leash ready and have whoever is running along with them or walking along with them have I need to be adopted sign on them. You know, that just very possibly could work.
I think that committee that's working on it needs to take that as a suggestion. I know what I was going to ask the question now. Had to do with salary increases. And I was reading that article in the newspaper. I don't know if it was correct, but I assume it was. In which we were talking about the fact that the 2% salary increase that we have to match
For the schools.
for the schools.
Yes, ma'am.
In order to get the 2% from the governor,
That's correct.
is only for SOQ people.
That's correct.
That's right.
Okay, refresh my mind again, how much additional money based on the 2% for the SOQ plus all the other?
1.4.
It somehow, I don't have my book with me tonight, so.
To get the 600, to get roughly about $450,000 from my questions from Ms. Blackburn.
Right.
To get that money, we have, or the school board would have to allocate $1.4 million extra. So those dollars are tied. There is some extra state money, but it's not the full $600,000 that we see in the budget.
Right, I knew the 600 was there, but.
But that $600,000 minus $100,000, so it's roughly about $450,000 is the matching funds. But it doesn't match the
That's right.
$1.4
It doesn't
million
match.
that we need.
Right, so there is a need in just the regular budget for an additional 1.4 million.
Yes, ma'am.
In the school board budget, but we're the only source of their money.
You are correct.
So there's a big issue there, and we still don't know about transportation, is that correct?
Like what do you mean?
And
The effect of the
that what effect that will have.
But even then, the school board may elect not to do those things. And if they don't, then they'll have to adjust the budget
Right, it's
accordingly.
whatever they do.
They-
We
they
have to
can
just do
decide.
that. Right,
They have to.
right. Well, I just wanted to kind of bring that up and to remind myself and remind everybody else of where we are.
So let me ask this, Mr. Tuck, when I read in the paper that the governor set 2% aside for teacher pay raises, and he leaves it at that, it's not telling the whole story, is it?
It is not accurate as far as I understand it. And looking at the budget, it's not the entire school system.
Yeah.
To be able to give everyone a raise in the entire school system other than core classes and math,
That's
maybe
what-
he
yeah,
explained it better than I because he's been going to the school board meetings.
SOQ
I've been
people.
trying to watch them on video. It is not a blanket. So in order to get 2% across the board for all school employees, then that's the difference in the funding.
Yeah, it's the piece of the governor's funding and the 1.4 million together provides the full 2%.
Yeah, so roughly, yeah.
And their employment is including support staff about, what, 1,500? Is it that much or 1,200?
I'm not sure what the number is on that.
I don't
Total
know the
staff,
number of employees.
FTEs.
But basically the state's giving about 20% of the raise.
Right.
They're saying they're giving a 2% raise, but they're only giving 20% of the money necessary for a 2%.
Yeah, providing half the money for 47% of the employees, yeah.
Now, is it, I think I asked this question, I don't know whether I dreamed it or what, but if a county was to refuse that 20% of the 2% pay raise, now from what I understand, you don't get none of the money.
Correct. That's correct.
That's
You would
correct.
only get we would only get in this county approximately 150, and Angie
Right.
Mark know the exact numbers.
Yeah.
I'm ballparking, so but approximately we would get additional $150,000 towards the schools. As I understand it, we've got about another county state funds of around $100,000, so we would be looking at $250,000 of operational funds.
And so people in Richmond are forcing, I guess, a reasonable county to do what it has to do to reach in its pockets deeper to do what needs to be done.
It's around the barn unfunded mandate.
Yeah.
So you
Yes,
look
it
bad
is.
if you don't do it.
Absolutely.
So one more for the state.
Now, I won't go that far, because there's $400,000 that we weren't, if we don't want to do it, we don't have to.
Right.
And when we were looking at, and I was fussing at one of the other boards that were arguing about a gift that was given to them, and they were pretty upset about it because it was being directed. Well, this is a gift, and if we decide to accept it, there's some costs that come along with this gift. Some strings attached. If we don't decide to take it, we've made a decision. But actually, it's not our decision to make. We give the money to the school board, and they can decide whether they can maintain employees and decide not to give these raises.
It's like reading recovery in a fire engine. I remember that one.
But I wanted to sort of get a couple of those things out for our viewers who may be looking at home, who sometimes would say that, well, you guys are saving 2% of the money because the governor or the state's giving 2% raises to the teachers. Well, why are y'all coming up with money? So people don't really understand. That's the reason why I wanted that to get that clarification part out to the general public.
Right, it's like everyone's not going to get a Christmas present unless someone else steps forward besides Santa, if the state is Santa.
I wouldn't call the state Santa.
I was going to say it's been a long time since the state's been
Nice.
I guess the old saying go that he's been bringing the localities lumps of coal, as they say. You know, your people say that you get a lump of coal when you're bad. So we've been getting lumps of coal. Any other questions while we're in work session?
Squeeze that coal hard enough, and you'll be able to get a diamond out of it, though.
Yeah.
We're going to put you in charge of that.
Mr. Gregg, Ms. Perkins,
I'm okay.
any other?
I'm fine.
Matt?
Yeah. I'm talking a lot today. I apologize.
Hey, we talk about a whole lot of money. You need to talk about
Yeah, just a couple things. I mean, I just wanted to share, since I don't have any more questions, I just kind of wanted to share a couple kind of concerns since we're in work session, and maybe we can talk about it later when we talk about the advertised tax rate. One of the things is that for the fund, and I'll go kind of from small to big, is one of the things that I'm concerned about is that there's no money in here in our grants to outside agencies for things like Mountain View Humane, which ran a very successful trial program in spaying, neutering cats, which we all know is a concern with feral cats in Montgomery County. And I'd like to perhaps, when we get into the nitty-gritty, maybe in a work session, is to think about how we divvy up the funding to external agencies, and maybe we could do a little bit more for those agencies. Another thing, other groups like Christiansburg Institute or Big Brother Big Sister, I think those are places which might deserve some consideration. I'm sure there's a lot of others as well. On a good note, I'm really happy to see that we were able to, in the county administrator's proposed budget, increased funding to Parks and Recreation by a relatively significant amount. I would like to, however, point out that Roanoke County about comparable population to us, spends almost 4 times as much as we do on Parks and Recreation. They have nearly $4 million budget for Parks and Recreation. Granted, some of that is maintenance, and that's taken care of in other parts of our budget. But, you know, I think we're moving in the right direction, but, you know, I think we might be able to do more. Related to that, one of my great concerns with this budget is I think it is forward-looking, but it might not be forward-looking enough. And one of my concerns especially is that although we have, and we spent a good deal of time, and I'm glad talking about the reserve funds that we do have, is that there isn't a dedicated stream, funding stream going into anything else right now except for, in the proposed budget, except for the school capital reserve. And especially that we're going to have a lot of county capital needs coming up. Libraries, land for business parks, land for ball fields and parks. I mean, town of Christiansburg just purchased, 60 acres down Pepper's Ferry for ball fields and things like that. I'd love to be able to see the county be able to do that at some point in the future. The public safety building, we're going to have to pay for that coming up, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing that's very, I honestly, and I'll be very honest, I never thought that sequestration would actually happen, but apparently these people in Washington are so bullheaded that they'd allowed it to happen. And the direct effect of sequestration in Montgomery County is that it cuts Title I and special education funding that goes to Montgomery County Public Schools. And so this is money that directly affects Auburn Elementary, Bellevue Elementary, Christiansburg Primary, Christiansburg Elementary, Eastern Montgomery Elementary, Falling Branch Elementary, and Price's Fork Elementary. Those 7 schools are direct recipients of Title I funding, and they're going to see their reading specialists slashed. They're going to see all their services to help these low-achieving, disadvantaged children get up to the standards that we all want them to achieve. And so this is a great concern to me, that as much as we were able to do for the schools in our budget, and we're doing a lot more than we should have to do because the federal government and the state government are just not doing what they should be doing. I think we might need to try to step up a little bit more to take care of that. So, and those are my kind of general concerns, and I'll kind of leave them there for now.
And one of the things I disagree a little bit about the Parks and Rec, I think that there's a different comparison with Roanoke County in some ways. And the reason for it being is we have 2 of the largest towns that take up a large portion of our population. Kids inside those towns that Roanoke County does not have, those kids are going through the Parks and Rec departments at Blacksburg and the Parks and Rec at Christiansburg. Now, I haven't done a comparison to see if you factored those in and started taking into consideration that. And I think that is a difference. Now, there is the town of Benton inside Roanoke County, but I think it's a pretty sizable amount difference, especially when you talk about the Blacksburg's tax rate is 22 cents. I think Christiansburg's is somewhere around 11. And I think Benton is either 4 or 6 cents. But as far as the rec departments, I also noticed that it seems like Roanoke County has been able to work very well with Roanoke City and the town of Benton for a lot of different other things, including animal shelters and being able to take care of their animals and working it. And maybe that's what we need to start trying to work with the town of Blacksburg, town of Christiansburg, and see what we can achieve in that way. To try to address some of those needs.
Let me add this, and another thing, we're quite often compared to Roanoke County and Montgomery County, and matter of fact, we had an opportunity to see that monstrosity of the green, what they call it, Green Ridge or whatever, that big recreation center. Beautiful. But when you start looking, comparing Montgomery County to Roanoke County, you really have to step back and look at that $1.09 tax rate that they have down there. And we're 87, and you look at Roanoke County, it says, man, they're doing everything. They have their own in-house assessors. They assess property every year.
Yes, they do.
And so, when you look at the growth down there, and then you go to, and people, they say, well, Salem's got this and Salem's got that. Well, it's about what? $1.18. $1.18 in the city of Salem. And And so when you start looking at apples and apples, I think you have to look where that funding source comes from. If we were receiving a $1.09 such as Roanoke County, we probably could do the things that Roanoke County does. And but it seems like, you know, when you talk to people down there, with their tax structure, they do quite a few things. They've done some joint things with the Fire Academy down there. They have a 911 dispatch center that's second to none. They're big center down there, and it seems like to me that money's not an issue for them, and that the growth and I think they have, when you look across Roanoke County, they have a lot of infrastructure within that county. Their businesses are generating a lot of money for the county, the ones that's not in the city. When we look at our infrastructure, we don't have that much infrastructure, sewer, water, and so forth out through the county where we can be comparable to them and generate the money we need to generate. Hopefully that somebody talked about selling the properties. From what this board knows, if you know anybody wants some school service property, help us out, because we're really trying to move it.
We're marketing.
And we're marketing. I mean, you know, if you know somebody that can buy some of this property, help put it back on the tax rolls to help us out, hey, send them to the county administrator. Send them to any one of us. We'll help them out. But so you have to compare, you know, apples to apples, not apples to oranges and things like that.
Bill, they always, the restaurant and hotels they also have in the county.
The two times. Yeah.
But also, they have 153 paid staff for their volunteer. They don't have, well, they have a volunteer rescue and fire, but they have maybe a quarter or a fifth of the volunteers. Our citizens are giving 30 and 40 hours per week to man those 153 positions. I've forgotten it's somewhere around $13 million per year, not for their total. That's not their capital cost. That is just for their employees, right, that they've got there. And then you start doing the math as far as what our tax increase. Then you do the garbage, and then you look at the law enforcement costs. You're talking about our tax rate, if we provided those same services, would be much higher.
And you know, another thing, they don't have a big tax exempt entity in their county. You know, when you start looking at a large tax exempt entity like Virginia Tech,
or the National Forest.
Yeah, the National Forest and things like that.
Foundation.
And I understand what you're saying, Chris, too. And one thing, if you pass out down and get transported, you'll get a bill. You know, that's a recovery fee from them.
Let me,
okay, chime in so we.
Before we go, and two things. One, I have a house in Roanoke County, and I have a El Ranch brick, 3-bedroom, 3-bath, full basement. I have a house in Christiansburg, 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, just straight little ranch, about 800 foot less room than the one in Roanoke County. Taxes on the one in Roanoke County is less than the one in Christiansburg, because you've got to realize it's what there's two numbers they use. One, just like, is when they appraise it. And so they appraise it less but the rate is higher. So, you know, it seems to me that, you know, if I was buying a house just for tax purposes, I might go to Roanoke. Because theirs actually, when it really comes down to it, is a little bit less. The other thing is, and I don't know where this needs to come in at, but it's has really not a lot to do with the budget other than the fact that they're using a lot of electricity. Salem is sending their people up there, busing them up to Shawsville on that football field that's been vacated by by this. And they're coming in there with 2 buses, playing hockey or what they're playing. I seen them in there, and I don't have a problem with that, because I'm sure the school probably is getting something out of it.
Okay.
I hope so. What I have a problem with is they forget to turn the lights off about half the time, and 12, 1, 2 o'clock, the lights are still burning all out there, and nobody's over there.
Where's it?
In the old shelter.
Middle school.
Didn't we say to send that to the liaison committee one time?
We
I
did.
think you
That
brought it
was a year or
up.
so ago, 2 ago, that,
Yeah.
And I don't think we ever got an answer.
different, was it different people down there that,
and they even, they have a lot of their mates down there playing other teams.
We have a liaison meeting this week, and I'll
Yeah.
bring it up.
But that's
again.
something that,
I think part of that is protection.
that they,
Vandalism.
no, they don't turn the lights on there for that.
They did in my school in Christiansburg.
And I'm talking about the football type lights. It's not little lights. We're talking about lights in
the big,
football.
yeah, the
Well, the
big.
school's supposed to.
I know,
pay for that.
I know what the lights are, because I got up the money to pay for them.
Yeah.
Now,
Well, aren't the school, isn't the
that's the
school
fact.
supposed to pay for that out of their pocket? I mean, the money they take in, aren't the schools?
I would think that the schools would, they definitely have light bills from it. I'm just wondering if they know that the lights are being left on. That's all I'm saying is,
Bring that up.
if they're going to use it, they need to turn it off most likely, or they gonna go in a hole on renting them things out.
And sometimes when I look at this budget, it's you're looking at 2 cents to be set aside for school capital, and just thinking if 25 or 30 years ago, if previous boards had set money aside in preparation for replacing school buildings and so forth, we would not have had that 12 cents tax increase, because it's just like anything else. If you go with the down payment, you don't have to borrow as much money. And I think that we know that probably 6, 8, 7, 9 years, we're going to be looking at another school system here. I mean, another high school probably to be replaced. And if you got some money, I think it addresses preparation for some capital needs down the road, instead of just going blind into it and says, oh, let's go out and borrow $60 million to build a school. Well, if you can save a little bit along, you don't have to have a whole lot of money and to do what you have to do. So that's one of the interesting things. And we haven't always, but sometimes I've heard people talk that the schools need a capital budget. I've heard that quite often, because they use the operating budget, and capital budgets let you prepare for large capital needs. And before we go to work session, any more comments or whatever?
I move we go out.
Got to move a motion to go out. Need a second? Please call roll.
Mr. Gabriel?
Aye.
Mr. Creed?
Aye.
Ms. Perkins?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Brown?
Aye.
6
And
ayes.
before we go on, we're going to have a 5-minute quick break. 5 minutes. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you for the call.
Well, some of us might need 6.
I was looking at that.
Man. Well, I just like to do that every now and then.
Just because you wanted to be a judge, right?
Yeah. Under old business, subject A is going to be moved to the next meeting. So we'll move on to new business. Established an advertised real estate tax rate for fiscal year 2014 budget.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is the opportunity for the board to set the established, or set the advertised tax rate for both the real estate tax and the personal property tax. And then once you let us know the numbers that you want to set, we can let you know the amount of the budget that is required for that. So
I move we, is it okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
That we change the real estate tax increase from 87 to 89. And I think, what did we say in the budget? 255
for personal property.
For personal property tax increase. And that would be a budget in the amount of,
Y'all want to jump in on that one?
That'd be 167,868,476.
say it again?
Yeah, say that one more time, a little slower. We're kind of old up here, you know, and
167,868,476.
thank you.
Thank you. So I move that for advertised purposes only. Second.
We have a motion. You second, Mary? Mm-hmm. Okay. Any further discussion, or you can call the question? You okay? Wait a minute. Discussion.
Just in regards to this, for me, part of my thinking is you live within your means. And to me, we had $2.8 million worth of growth in the county. And that is the equivalent of a 4-cent tax increase, roughly. And I appreciate the work that the county administrator's done, the county staff. But to me, if we have that kind of growth in 1 year, that should be the kind of year that we don't raise taxes, and that we say, okay, as I think some of Matt's emails called it last year, the perfect storm. We had a 12-cent tax increase. I would have supported a 10-cent tax increase last year, but we went to 12, and so to me, and I know this is just the advertised rate.
Yeah, advertised.
But, and I won't go into all the aspects of the budget, but to me, when you've got that type of growth, this is the year that we should say, no, this is not the year to raise taxes. We've got the growth, we can do this. And so that's my position. I won't.
Well, I can just say that the reason I voted to advertise this is because I've sat on this board for such a long time, and we failed to put away money for school construction. And I know that it's caused the taxpayers at various and sundry times great increases. And I think this is, when we do have a good year, it's a good time to set aside that money for school construction or for school purposes and maintenance, because who knows, we may not have a lot, in the next year. We don't know what's coming. And I just feel that it's important to do that. It's like if you've got extra money in your household budget, you put aside a little bit of it extra. It's like investing. So that's why I did it, but that's my reason for doing it.
And I understand that, but to me, it's a little bit different. Our extra is that 4-cent tax increase, that 2.8 million. That's our extra. We got our pay raise, but we're saying, well, that wasn't good enough.
Right.
And so I guess that's where I'm coming from.
Sure.
Comment? Question? Any other?
I agree. I think this is, but I don't think it's aggressive enough. And I think that the reason that I don't think this is aggressive enough is because it's simply the advertised tax rate. We are unnecessarily limiting ourselves at too low a potential tax rate to talk about what we could also do, because we know we're going to talk about what we could do with less. But what about a little bit more, especially in a time in which unemployment is dropping, in which sales tax is increasing, consumer spending is actually increasing, personal property is increasing, personal property income from personal property taxes is increasing. This is a situation in which we can actually maybe get ahead. And what the budget that's presented by the county administrator does is basically keep up with inflation. Even with this 2-cent tax rate, 2% increase on the real estate tax, and a 10-cent increase on the personal property tax, it's keeping us up with inflation. But when do we get ahead of things? Is that we're not a family, the government is not a family, it's effectively, it's not a business either, but it functions effectively like a business in certain ways, in that certain times costs go up and you provide certain services to your citizens and you need to pay for those costs. Some of those costs are, for example, maintenance, county capital, things like that. And again, as I said just a little while ago, I'm really glad that we're doing something for the schools. I think this is incredibly important that we put away money for future school, not just new construction, but maintenance, and for renovations of existing structures. That absolutely needs to be done.
Capital, just whatever.
Just capital, exactly. And then, but I'm worried again that we have this other these other section of capital needs, and we do have some money put away towards that. But there's no new money that's going to be going into that. And we need to be increasing that so that if we come across a parcel of land that we could buy for some ball fields, some park, some business to expand, Falling Branch or something like that, we're not going to have the money to be able to do that. And moreover, again, this is a particular situation in which sequestration has hit Montgomery County schools, and it's hit them very hard. It's hit all public schools all across the country very hard. But here in Montgomery County, we need to take care of the people who can't take care of themselves, and that are Title I kids in Auburn, in Christiansburg, in Bellevue, in Price's Fork, in Ryan. Yeah. And so maybe this is a moment in which we could simply talk about that. And again, we're not setting the tax rate right now, but we're inviting people when we go out to Reiner tomorrow night to listen to the community, and they say no. We don't want that extra money to help our kids in our schools. We want a lower tax rate. And then we can pay attention to that. We go out to Price's Fork and they say the same thing, or we go out to Price's Fork and you say, you should have done more. Right now, we can't do anything like that.
Right.
But if we say we're going to advertise this so we can at least talk about it to see what a slightly larger budget for this county would look like, then I think it's worthwhile.
What do you think we ought to advertise to that, Matt?
I would suggest a real estate tax rate of 90 cents to increase it from 87 to 90 cents. And I would want to talk about, for the personal property tax, increasing from 245 to 260. So an extra 5 cents on the personal property tax. And I asked the county administrator, we can do separate motions. So we can advertise one at a certain rate and one at another rate. We don't have to do it all in one motion if there's no consensus on this. So if the board decides we want to maybe advertise a slightly higher rate on one and a slightly lower rate on another.
They don't have to be married.
They don't have to.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yes, we can.
I would like to second the motion that Ms. Perkins made.
I think Mary already said. She already seconded. Already been seconded. You have a comment or any comments?
No, we just need to vote on it, haven't we?
Well, let me say a little something before we do this. When I look at the advertised rate, and this is my own thinking and studying the budget, there has to be some balance between the haves and the have-nots. And and I'm sure we have different people who live in our districts and things who are affluent and may have those large incomes, and then we have some who are on fixed incomes and things like this. But when I look at this budget, at this proposal, and the 2 cents going for capital, and I'm sitting there like, this is, in my opinion, probably the small guy's budget, because he or she is paying a little bit at a time instead of a whole lot down the road. It's just like I'm saving in this capital fund to address this problem down the road. Or you can say we can keep taxes flat, and when, for an example, Christiansburg High School need a new school, we can go out and borrow $60 million and raise the taxes up 8 or 9 cents or whatever it takes to pay it. Or you can say, hey, we have several million over here to start out with, and when you go to the well to borrow some more money to go with that to complete the project, you don't have to borrow as much, and so forth. So that's all I had to say, and I'm fine. And then anybody has any other discussion to add before we call the question?
I wanted to ask one more time. even with this budget we have, Craig, how much has the school system asked for that we're not funding?
My recommendation in the budget, the schools ask for 3.6 million in additional funding, and in this budget, I'm recommending 2.2. So it's a shortfall of $1.4 million. 1.4
million.
Yes, ma'am.
Which is about what it takes us to give them a 2
Yes, ma'am.
or 2% raise.
It's about a 2 cent. Yes, ma'am.
So, all the money that we would raise with 2 cents would go straight to a reserve.
Yes, ma'am. That's
for
my
schools.
recommendation. Now the
By your
board.
recommendation, if we raised it 3 cents or 4 cents, we might get 2 cents more on the budget, the operating expenses, which then becomes 1.4 million, which would totally fund the school budget.
If that was your preference, yes, ma'am.
Well, I'm sticking with your budget, but if somebody wants to make it more to advertise.
Mr. Chair, I call for the question.
Call for the question. Call the roll, please, Vicki.
Ms. Perkins?
Aye.
Sorry, can I just get clarification on what we're voting on, please?
You're voting on
2 cents.
2 cent for real estate, that would make it 89 cent. 10 cent for personal property, that would be 255. And then the budget
No, 2.
would be 167,868,476.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, no, that was math.
It's mirrors the
And this is the advertised rate.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
I
Just advertise, not the tax
Not
rate.
setting it, just advertising.
Okay.
Okay. So Ms. Perkins said yes. Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Mr. Todd?
Nay.
Mr. Gabriel?
No?
Mr. Creed?
Yes.
Mr. Gardner?
Yes.
I have 4 ayes and 2 no.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Now the big item we talked about quite a bit a couple weeks ago is an ordinance to amend Chapter 10, Section 1041 and 1061 by allowing the keeping of chickens, I guess, within residential zone areas in the county.
So moved.
I'm going to second by going,
Got a second and got a motion and a second. Any discussion about that? Any whatsoever?
I think we've been over that, and I didn't get any aids, I should have known.
I've
It's probably time to put it out to roost.
got a comment or two. I mean, it's just that I was one of the ones that got it out there, and then when we were talking about it, I think it was 4 of us. But the more I think about it, I think that when you start looking at chickens in residential neighborhoods, I think that we might be creating us a little problem down the road to sort of trying to fix something that's probably not broken. And don't get me wrong, I was raised up around chickens. I've got friends with chickens. I get fresh eggs from people with chickens and things like this. But chickens can create some problems, and that's all I have to say. And so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion before we call the question?
Yes.
Go ahead.
You know, I know like when we passed our I can't even think anymore. I think it was our zoning and our comprehensive. We always plan. We always came back. It can be revisited every year. Okay. So I guess what I would want to know is, would this be something that we could, if we, you know, if it passed, or could we add to it or whatever, that we'd like to have a revisitation as far as like, could there be, like if there were problems or something with it, could it be brought back to us so that we would know about it or something, since we've never done this before?
could we simply ask for an update in a year's time or something like that?
how-
Yeah, well, the problem, I mean, you can always amend the ordinance, however, you will then have grandfathered
Again.
uses
Well,
So-
can we somehow, I mean, what can we do so, like, let's say we put this,
Get chickens, but people currently have chickens, so long as they keep chickens and don't stop having chickens, then they would have the right to keep them.
We're creating a nightmare, is what we're creating.
Here's the thing. I mean, think about it. Chickens have been raised in residential areas. They're raised right now in Radford. There are no problems. They really aren't. They don't create nearly as much waste as a single dog. When you start talking about 6 chickens, they don't cause that kind of problems. We're talking about just a few chickens to try to let people get involved with it, as far as, talking about food being here.
Sustainable.
That's right,
Exactly.
sustainable.
And to me, we're talking about also giving people some rights, giving people some opportunities. And instead of, so many times we take things away at this board. We take, property rights away. This is one of those times that since I've been on the board, we're talking about giving people a right to be able to do something that they've been prevented from. And remember, some of these tracts of land are hundreds of acres, and they can't have a chicken, but they can have 6 dogs. They can have, I take that back. That would violate the kennel ordinance, but 4 dogs, if I remember right. And so we're talking about just a few things. They're not going to create any more waste than probably 6 rabbits that people might keep around as pets. So, as somebody who has recently raised chickens and started doing this a couple of years ago, I clean out my hen house in a couple of times, a month even, and it's not that bad. I haven't had any of the raccoon problems that Jim talked about. I haven't, but I do keep my feed up and I keep it in metal containers, and I understand that. But if somebody's chickens start getting outside, then that's a problem. Then if they damage somebody else's flower bed, they'll have to pay for those things. That's why we've got the enclosures. And so I guess that's what I was looking at. Now, at the same time, Marty's right. As somebody who sometimes is on the other side of the fence, they will be grandfathered in. And if it does become a problem and a nightmare, as Gary is worried about, but we're talking about, you don't see many 10-pound chickens. You see a lot of
I don't know
60
why we have to give them something that they've already got. If they, I know people that live in less than a quarter of acre lot that have chickens.
But those
and
are
if they're neighborly, nobody cares. But so why do we want to say that, hey, wait a minute, you're forbidding these people now to have any chickens?
No, but right now, everybody, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, that is in a residential area, which is basically everything that's on the left-hand side if you're going through opposite side of the street of the country club. None of those folks, they're all considered residential, can have chickens. The people on the other side, they're in agricultural across the street, and that's what Joel Donahue was talking about. They can have chickens down through there. So
if they've got enough land. But
no, on the right-hand side, if they're in agricultural.
It's agriculture,
and
What about the other side? He was talking about his side, he couldn't have any chickens.
Because he's got 1.9 acres.
1.9 acres.
So he can't have chickens now, and he still couldn't have chickens under this ordinance.
He could have chickens now if he wanted.
No, he can't.
Well, as long as nobody don't complain about him.
We want people to follow our ordinances, not to violate them.
We're not here to micromanage people.
Well, I'm going to keep it
Mr. Chair. People have lived in this county for hundreds of thousands of years.
Mr.
And
Chair, sorry.
we have gotten all
Call the
this
question,
far without having a
Question,
problem.
Okay. Mickey, call the roll.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Gabriel?
Yes.
Mr. Creed?
Abstain.
chicken.
You're going to have egg on your face.
All right, I'll vote aye.
Which one of those 3
Under
votes count?
protest, I'm going to vote aye, but I really don't want chickens in residential areas, but I'm voting aye anyway.
Well, that's 1, 2, 3, 4. So I guess don't look like the chicken patrol's gonna prevail.
So what is your
Aye.
I just don't want to discuss it anymore.
Yeah, we wore it out.
5 ayes, 1 no.
I thought it would die. Okay, let me see where I'm at. I think
Subject C.
Subject C. Resolution renewing Montgomery County participation in a new River Valley Home Consortium for an additional 3-year term.
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? If not, please call the roll.
Ms. Perkins?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Gabriel?
Aye.
Mr. Creed?
Aye.
Mr. Brown?
Aye.
6 ayes.
Subject D, proclamation to take back the night rally and march.
So moved.
Second.
Call the question, please.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Gabriel?
Aye.
Mr. Creed?
Aye.
Ms. Perkins?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Mr. Brown?
Aye.
6 ayes.
Man, now it's time for Long County report. County Attorney report.
No report, Mr. Chair.
County Administrator's report.
Mr. Chair, just one item this evening. I wanted to remind everyone of our upcoming community conversations meetings. We have one tomorrow night at 7 o'clock at the Reiner Fire Department in Reiner. Excuse me. Then we have one the following Monday, which is March 18th at 7 o'clock at the Prices Fork Elementary School. So hopefully you've got those 2 meetings on your calendar. We then also have a meeting for the board on Tuesday the 19th at 6 o'clock to get an update and a discussion on health insurance. That'll be a work session just for
On what?
health insurance
On the 19th.
on the 19th.
What time?
6 p.m. And the meeting that has been tentative on your calendar for the 14th, this Thursday, you can take off your calendar because you approved an advertised tax rate tonight. So we had held that date in case we couldn't reach consensus tonight, but since you did, that gives you Thursday night off.
Right.
That's pretty good because we can look in there and see a vacancy on one of those evenings.
And that's
Any more questions?
Are we having the public hearing still on the 26th?
Yes, ma'am. That's a Tuesday, right?
Yeah, at 6
Yes, ma'am.
o'clock?
Tuesday, the 26th at 6 o'clock is the public hearing for the tax rate and the public hearing for the budget. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And then we have our regular board meeting on Monday, the 25th. Does that take care of March?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Okay. Board members' reports. We'll start with Mr. Tuck.
Well, first of all, we do have that meeting, as the county administrator said, and many times the public comes up and we don't respond because it's our time to listen to what the public has to say.
Right, good. Good
But
point.
when we are, the intent of these public meetings that are going to take place out at Reiner and Prices Fork is for us to communicate back and forth, to be able to discuss the issues and explain sometimes, and we all try to do that a little bit tonight. There were some inaccuracies and things that were talked about, and people had questions about the school properties and the like. Second, we do have 3 vacancies still on the Planning Commission. Those are very important. As we've seen liquor by the drink pass, and the governor's going to sign that, it's my understanding.
It's already signed. It's already signed, yes, sir.
And so we are going to have some development, and we need some good people on the Planning Commission to be able to help make some of those decisions and approve some of the developments that are going to be taking place and helping this county continue to grow. So we want to make sure to do that. The other thing is, I don't believe that we recognize the Christiansburg High School's wrestling team won another state championship. I know it kind of seems like a regular occurrence for the wrestling team, but that's one of those things that we recognize. I didn't know if we were recognizing individual state champions. I know that there was some additional diving and in regards to that were done as well, but I think we've just done team events in the past.
That's correct.
And congratulations to Annette for the best one-liner since I've been on the board with that one quote. Take it. That's my report.
Supervisor Gabriel.
Just very briefly, I'm looking forward to the community meetings, both in Reiner and at Prices Fork. And also, just to add, it just reminded me when Supervisor Tuck mentioned the Christiansburg wrestling team, the Blacksburg boys track team, I believe, won the state championship as well. So I hope that we can recognize them too. And that's all I have for now.
Mr. Creed.
Got a couple little things, you know. Well, basically it's one, but it's drawn out a little bit. I've had a couple, 3 calls lately, but the one that really has got my dander up is a gentleman from down at Elliston. Mother house burnt down, and he and his fellow brothers and sisters and people that he could get help went down and was trying to clean everything up and get everything, you know, that they could salvage, anything that was worth salvaging, and take the rest of it up to the dump. Well, here is what got me. He took a scatter rug that had been burnt some to the dump, went to throw it in the bin, and they told me he couldn't have that. And something's just wrong about that. I mean, you know, I don't know where the beginning and the end should be, but you know, we've got to find some way of letting our attendants know what is and what is really not stuff that they can take. And you know, maybe they can't take that, but if they can't, shame on us, because that is something that's not put there by a contractor. It was purely something that they were trying to clean up after a fire. And of all times, they don't need to be taking that thing back up and down the road. It's, you know, we just need to do something about it, and that's all I can say.
I spoke to Supervisor Creed about this earlier today, and sorry, one thing I'd like to suggest is that we probably need to have a work session to discuss this topic. There have been some changes as to what the county can take to the Montgomery Regional Landfill, and that's where some of these restrictions, at least at my understanding when talking to staff, that's where some of the restrictions are coming from. I can't give you good answers as to why those restrictions are what they are. I know our guys have been fairly well versed in that, but I think we need to have a conversation with the board so the board fully understands what we're being responsible for, I'm sorry, what we're not responsible for. And then if we can't take those things for whatever reason, we need to figure out how we're going to address that. But I've gotten a couple of emails as well, and I do think there's still some inconsistency among the sites as well, and that's adding to the confusion. So if it's okay with the board, I'd like to have that as a work session to address it.
I would be in favor of it. I've got the same type of calls that Gary, somebody replacing a door that had a hole in it, and then we're talking about an interior door they weren't allowed to. They did go ahead and they went over to the dump at the Christiansburg site, but there's going to be a lot of people who are not going to do that. And it hasn't been that many years ago that we look down in the hollers and you drive along the road and there's just trash over the side.
That's right.
And it is I agree with Mr. Creed 100%. This is something, and I appreciate you putting on as a whole work session.
And you know, if we can't take them and pass them on to the landfill, then my question would be, what do we want them to do with them?
Well, and that's the question we need to get answered, because
if we can't tell them something, I don't blame them if they throw them beside the road. Then we'll have somebody go down there and pick them up and bring them in anyhow.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Okay. And the other thing I had was the lights at the school, and then we've talked about that. So.
Okay.
So.
I'm next, huh?
Supervisor Perkins.
Okay. Well, I really don't have much to report on. I have attended Pepper's Ferry and the PDC, and what the PDC has decided to do is to send out draft minutes of the meetings. This is the Planning District Commission. They have been, the ones from the last meeting have been sent out. I can forward those to you when I get them, and I will try to do that now and get those minutes to you. If there's anything in the minutes that, if you read them, they're not very long, but you can see what the Planning Commission is undertaking. If there's something in there you'd like to discuss, if I can't help you, then I'm sure that Mr. Meadows can help you with that. So that's it. So I'm trying to forward those to you right now.
Supervisor Biggs.
Well, I just wanted to remind everybody about March 20th. That you should have gotten your invitation about the meeting at the library for us. Did everybody get their invitation?
Yeah.
It's going to be at 7:30 at the Blacksburg Library.
7 or 7:30?
I think it said 7:30 on the invitation.
Okay.
Because I think what's going to happen is that the Board of Trustees will meet from 7 to 7:30, and then they'll have the reception. So I want to remind you about that. And then I also wanted to comment on Matt's proposal for taxes. I think, Matt has a good idea about planning, and I think that was mentioned here too. As someone that followed the Board of Supervisors meetings for 15 years before I ever got on the board, I guess it was probably longer than 15 years, so it's probably more like 16, 17 years. I used to actually go to the meetings. There wasn't that kind of planning ever discussed, like we've even discussed. There just wasn't. And the county was much more rural. It wasn't as urban. We didn't have the growth that we currently have. We didn't have things like the Corporate Research Center. We didn't even have a lot of the businesses that we have now. And, I agree that if there had been some forethought back then as to what could, what could be seen into the future, I think that maybe that would have helped along the way, because it seems like instead of being proactive, most of the time our counties had to be reactive. And I think we're now in a situation where we've talked as a board during our retreats, and we've talked, and we can sort of see that you do have to have a planning aspect, in thinking ahead to the future. And I know that when I was first on the board, basically what would happen is a lowering of the tax rate whenever more money came in. And so that put people behind too. I mean, it sounds like a good idea, but then when you look overall, it keeps putting you behind instead of just like keeping it at the same rate maybe. So what I guess I would say is that I think we're on the right track as far as thinking about the future and having our reserve funds. We didn't have reserve funds when I first got on the board. We didn't really have any of that kind of thing. We didn't even have financial planners to help us. I think Marty was around when we first got those people on board, so we were sort of out there by ourselves. But our county has changed, and it's a growing county, and it has growing needs, and we only have so many resources, and so it's really difficult to try to balance everything. But I think every individual on this board does his or her best to think about the whole picture. I think I stated that last time, but I just wanted to commend Matt on, sort of thinking ahead and thinking about those concerns, and I think we're all concerned about the Title I, and I think we're all concerned about the things that keep impacting us, and Virginia is going to be sort of in a mess if all this stuff goes through, because we are so dependent on the federal government for government jobs and contractors and the shipbuilding business, and all that's going to affect our state revenues if we don't get some stuff straightened out. So I just wanted to commend you, Matt, for thinking ahead and presenting it to the board in the way you did, because I think it's something that we all sort of need to think about.
Thank you, Supervisor Biggs, and it's up to me. All I can say is that there's 7 districts in Montgomery County, and no one district can survive out there alone. We all need each other. Whether we like it or not, we're all in this thing together. And so each one of our board members, they bring different perspectives to this board, and it's good. We don't always agree on everything, but what I can say, it's a lot of mutual respect between the board members. Nobody holds any grudges or anything like this. And when all 7 of us come together, we come in our hearts, within our hearts thinking, what is the best interest of this board for the entire county? Also thinking about our particular districts and so forth, because probably if I had everything in my district that I needed, and when it came to a tax increase and I didn't need nothing else, I would probably say no, no, no. But you got to think beyond those borders of your particular district, and however you think is, I respect those opinions. I respect if somebody says we need to roll taxes back to 75 cents. I respect that, you know. And I hope if I say we ought to raise it to $2, I hope they respect that too, and somewhere in the middle we can find a middle ground. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been here quite a bit tonight. We had a chicken battle. The chickens won.
Hey, don't try to take my line away.
Okay. But
Don't egg him on.
okay, Chris.
Before, and I know we started off the meeting, but I would just wonder if we would keep Chairman Politis and his family in our prayers and our thoughts.
Yes.
And that's the only thing I wanted to add before we...
We also pray for a safe trip for Mr. Creed traveling up the road. He had a loss in his family.
And for Carol.
And to Carol and things.
Edmonds.
Thank you, guys. Thank you guys for all the support you've given to Carol. She's had a difficult time, but she should be joining us, coming back later in the week, and I know your thoughts and prayers have been very much appreciated.
And I want to thank the staff, because, you know, I think Judy was sick and Carol was out, and Craig was on the verge of getting sick, and when Mark and the staff and Angie and Ruth and all these people stepped up to the plate to help take some of the weight off of Mr. Matters, I thought that was going above and beyond the call of duty. And they left before I could say, well, I told them thank you personally for this. And so with some motion to adjourn or something, is that something out there?
So moved. Second.
Is anybody going to vote no?
No.
Okay. The consent, the group has it unanimously.
We adjourned.
Yeah.